Brandon Johnson is petitioning and battling with the state in order to get $1 billion additional from the state that he feels like the city of Chicago is owed. Check it out.
But first, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is looking to get a little help funding Chicago public schools.
The mayor was in Springfield today trying to get state lawmakers to pony up more state dollars.
Political reporter Paris Schutz has the latest on what it is the mayor wants.
A little bit of help, Don and Scott. That's $1 billion worth. That's what Mayor Johnson says state taxpayers owe Chicago public schools above what they're already providing. The mayor made the rounds in the state capitol today and had one-on-one meetings with Governor Pritzker and Senate President Don Harmon. These meetings come as CPS faces a budget hole of $400 million, and the Chicago Teachers Union has asked for 9% yearly raises in their next labor contract. And according to the governor's budget office, CPS gets more state money than it used to, $2.1 billion this year compared to $1.8 billion 5 years ago. So far, lawmakers are showing the same level of skepticism to Johnson's request as they have to the Bears. Likely it's a non-starter. And to punctuate Johnson's troubles in Springfield, the Senate committee unanimously passed a bill that would prevent budget cuts to the city's selective enrollment public schools. Now, those are the top performing schools in the city. Those are the ones that kids have to test to get into. The bill is in response to the Chicago Board of Education's stated plans to redirect money away from those schools and to neighborhood schools. That is a plan supported by the Chicago Teachers Union and Mayor Johnson.
So let me revise that. Let me go back and look at that for a second. So what they're basically saying is that there should not be any funding cuts to the schools that are actually performing and doing great things, to redivert those funds over into schools that are underperforming just because you want to be a part of the diversity, equity, and inclusion club. I got it. And I agree with it. I don't think that overperforming schools should have funding cut, and then they should divert that funding over into schools that don't have anything. But more importantly, Brandon Johnson is saying, yo, the state, y'all owe us some more money. And we got teachers that's asking for a 9% raise. Y'all owe us some more money. We want to continue to get to the bag. So before I go into when I say what I think about this whole situation, let him answer the questions, because Biden was also in Chicago talking about how awesome that they're doing. He was also over in Wisconsin. But Brandon Johnson is going to tell you out of his own mouth. I have not seen this. I'm going to observe it for the first time. And so we're going to break it down after he give his thoughts, because I want to be objective, right?
Seems pretty dead set on not giving you $1 million. And he's pushing back, increasing funding for CPS when they're instead declining enrollment and steady funding all along. So is that why?
Well, look, actually enrollment continues to increase. We've actually seen our system stabilized, and I think there's no disagreement that the city of Chicago, through the good work of State Representative Leader Will Davis, that have shifted this funding formula to respond equitably, what the city of Chicago deserves as a result of that piece of legislation is something that I'm committed to pushing for, and I know that we have partners here who understand the value of funding our public education system.
Do y'all also understand that he's saying that enrollment is increased partially because they have a whole lot of migrants that have become a part of the school system? See, that's the part that they're not going to tell you. Thank you, Enforcer 2K9. I appreciate that super chat. I'm definitely going to be reading that super chat shortly. Y'all do know that this is it's so many different moving parts and so many reasons that they see as beneficial that they may overlook all of the negative impacts of having this migrant crisis and this migrant population that's moving to all of these liberal cities, because in a lot of these liberal cities that are now falling by the wayside, what they do is they get funding per pupil depending on what the enrollment is inside of the school system. And so not only is the funding allocated based off of enrollment, but the more children that they have, the more that they can go to the federal government and they can say, hey, listen, we got all of these schools. It's been stabilized. We're not losing students. Count day, there was a whole lot of kids there. Well, part of one of the reasons that the schools are also increasing enrollment is because it's a bunch of people that's in it that don't necessarily pay taxes. They're not paying taxes. They're not paying property taxes. They're not contributing into the tax base. So they're requesting more funding, which there's a budget that's allocated for schools. So they would have to take funding away from overperforming schools people are actually successfully funding and they getting the results that they want in order to give it over into a tax base that's not actually generating any revenue, or they just playing a numbers game. It's just like accounting, except for they using kids and students in order to be able to do it, right? And so this is why it's important for me to then listen to these videos and listen to the responses, because they're not going to give you the full context. They just going to tell you what they want you to hear in order for them to be able to fund their roles and plug in the holes of their budget. But it doesn't mean that they're running it successfully. So they'll tell you, yeah, man, listen, crime is down. Well, is that retail theft? Is that violent crime? Oh, numbers is up. Like they'll play these games with y'all, but it's only because they speak into a population of people that can't decipher between the context, because I understand it from a political and a business perspective. That's why the Millionaire Morning Show is the best show on the face of this earth. Make sure y'all tap into the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat. Let's get to it, y'all.
Next person.
The goal was to come here and try to get in place to get some money, a lot of money. What's the real goal?
Well, look, it's a couple. One, we have to continue to make sure that the state of Illinois is doing right by the economic engine of the state of Illinois, which is the city of Chicago. But it's also to continue to build relationships. Look, the opportunity that we have in this moment as a state to really build a type of operation that speaks to equity and justice, this is a unique chance for us to do that. So it's a level setting, it's making sure that we're building on relationships, but it's also clear that in order for the state of Illinois to be the great state that it is, that the city of Chicago has to have its fair share of resources.
When you listen to this, right, because a lot of people don't understand how funding works with public schools. Well, for Chicago public schools in particular, it comes from a bevy of different sources. So I've already explained to you guys in previous live streams how, or not even just in previous live streams, but on multiple different platforms. Shout out to Ben Flack. I'm going to read that super chat shortly. I appreciate y'all. I've already explained to you guys that the primary source for funding a lot of these schools comes from your property taxes. So when you pay property taxes, not only does it pay their salary, it pays the police salary. It also goes into the funding for schools. It goes into infrastructure, millages, community colleges, so on and so forth. But that's not the entirety of it, because when you pay your taxes, especially in a place like Chicago, right, you not only are paying property taxes, maybe you're paying city taxes, but you also pay state taxes. Well, guess what? Everybody pays state taxes. So how much goes into the coffers, or how much of public school funding for CPS, Chicago Public Schools, come from the state? Well, 30%. 30% of the funding that goes into Chicago Public Schools in order to educate your children comes from the state, in Chicago in particular, or from Illinois. So that's why he's over there petitioning, because they have budget holes. And they're trying to fill these budget holes, and so they rob people to pay Paul. And then they go over and they say, well, listen, we got this. Teachers is coming up. Inflation is happening. Costs are going up. All of the stuff, right? Vendors are asking for more money. We need $1 billion more. They just give a flat number. We need $1 billion more in order to plug the funding short holes, and also to continue to educate not only your children, but alongside these migrant children. 30%, that's a fact, comes from the state that goes into Chicago's public schools. The other 70% comes from the city and other different sources, but 30% of Chicago's public school funding comes from the state.
What kind of reception did you get from the folks you met with?
Yeah, it was very positive. I mean, look, I've spoken with the governor, with leadership in both parties, and they recognize the value of the city of Chicago. And I understand the full context of the state of Illinois to build a budget that's centered around our values, that's balanced. And people appreciate the work that we are doing collectively to do just that, for not just for the city of Chicago, but the entire state.
Hi, the House Bill 303, the selective bill, passed out of Senate Executive a unanimous ruling. Did you talk to Senate President Harmon about possibly trying to amend that, and how so?
Yeah, we've had conversations, and those amendments are being assessed and analyzed now, and those conversations are ongoing. Look, here's what we ultimately want. We want an equitable school district that speaks to the needs of the people of the city of Chicago.
I can't stand when leaders, especially black leaders, say we want equitable. Equitable. You know what that means when they saying that? They're basically using race, or they're using a community-based diversity and equity and inclusion talking point in order to try to justify getting more money when you don't deserve it. Why do Anton say that you don't deserve it? Well, you're basically telling other people to shoulder the burden of what you can't manage effectively. So if you are continuing to raise property taxes, but you still don't have a sufficient tax base, if you decided that you wanted to make yourself a sanctuary city, but you don't know how to be able to, you don't really know how to be able to pay for any of this stuff, you diverting funds and you trying to steal from COVID money and all of this stuff, but then you saying we want equity. We want an equitable amount of funding for what we got going on in our schools. What you basically saying is we fumbled our bag. We don't really know how we going to be able to pay our teachers, and we got a whole bunch of crime. And so we need everybody in the state to be able to pitch in to what we got going on in Chicago, because Chicago is the biggest liberal city over in Illinois. That's what it means. When they use these key words, they're not using it to actually justify why it makes sense or why they can actually reasonably ask for $1 billion more from taxpayers from the entire state, because everybody got to contribute into Chicago, even if you don't live there. They're basically justifying it based off of the same talking points that we talk about when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, bro.
Chicago. That's what the people of Chicago elected me to do, is to speak on their behalf. And as these amendments continue to be assessed, we're going to create more space for these conversations so that we ultimately get to the goal that we want, which is an equitable school district.
An equitable school district. That means that his definition of what fair looks like means that you got to pay your fair share in order for their students to be able to catch up, because they don't know how to manage their school district or their funding effectively. That's what equity means to these people. You out here, you pay a crazy amount of property taxes, you pay an insane amount of state taxes, and we ain't even gonna talk about the federal, depending on what tax bracket that you in. And most of the time, you know what's so interesting? Not only do we have to pay state taxes and federal taxes, and we got to pay these huge property taxes, which we don't have no choice to do, but then people of resources then don't even get a chance to take advantage of it, because they wind up sending their kids to private school and they spend additional monies to separate their children because they understand that it's not fair. And even though it's not fair, you'll say it's not fair on your end. They say it's not fair because they paying more than their fair share. You take it from them and they still have to pay additional monies in order to educate their children properly, because they're willing to do whatever it takes in order to pour into their children. So what's really not fair? I'm paying for something that I don't get to use. The less amount of children that you have, meaning that the more mindful you are about your finances, resources, and pouring into your children. She over here having a whole bunch of children out of wedlock. She become a warden of the state. You got to educate her children. Her kids is over there fighting the teachers. And they taking more money to educate her children, and it's coming out of your pocket. And they can go over to the state and say, hey, listen, we want more equity. We want an equitable, fair solution to what we got going on with our children.
Consider that to be a snub at all, passing that bill unanimously while you were in the building?
Well, again, there's a process, that the General Assembly goes through. I understand that process, and we're going to stick to that process.
Any specific asks for infrastructure for the Bears Stadium?
Well, those conversations are ongoing with the Bears, with the General Assembly.
Correct,
everyone
DJ
knows
Ace.
that we have a structural dynamic that is problematic. You have a 100-year-old building that has millions of dollars in debt, and so you have this asset that is not getting the full benefit for the people of the state of Illinois. And as the Bears continue to have these conversations with leadership as well as the rank and file members, that's the case that they will have to make, but understanding that we have a structural damaged situation that really needs a solution. And that's what this is about, providing solutions to a problem that, like everything else, I've inherited.
As part of your discussions, I know there's a lot of budget constraints this year. The state has been also focusing on funding the migrant crisis going on in Chicago. Is that part of your ask today?
Well, the state of Illinois has been a strong partner in this mission. As everyone knows, you have the federal government that has not lended its support across the country, particularly because you have the former president of this country has directed his party not to do anything of substance.
Did he literally, y'all got to listen to what's being said. I'm going to replay it for y'all, and then I'm going to break it down for y'all. This is my first time seeing it. I'm reacting to it just like y'all. Listen to why he's saying that the migrant crisis isn't being funded, or that Biden is not extending monies to something that he's created, considering that Biden is the one that left the borders open. Check it out one more time.
Have the federal government that has not lended its support across the country, particularly because you have the former president of this country has directed his party not to do anything of substance.
He literally just blamed Trump. He blamed Trump. Now, we are in election season 2024 to determine whether or not Biden is going to get 4 more years. We have a Biden administration in which Kamala Harris was deemed the border czar. Biden himself said that we will not build another piece of border wall, and then he backtracked right after he was pandering to y'all when he was trying to get Obama in office and he was the vice president, and when he was saying, hey, listen, we're not even a strong country if we can't even protect our borders. So they fight in Texas on closing off the borders to ensure that we have legal, not illegal, legal migration into this country. He's blaming Trump for the migrant crisis that ultimately they can't fund, that the American people don't want, in which they labeled themselves a sanctuary city and welcome migrants into the city and have not been able to fund it, nor have they been able to manage it effectively. And we have migrants sleeping in a police station and in the airport in Chicago. He seriously is blaming Trump after 4 years of Biden and them not being able to manage this migrant crisis effectively. He said it's the former president's fault. Oh, man.
And then, of course, you have the governor of Texas who has decided to take his frustrations out on the rest of the country. Working with the state of Illinois has been a real partnership. The conversation around the additional resources that are needed to sustain this mission, of course, we're having those conversations, and we're encouraging all of our partners in the state of Illinois to ensure that we can respond to this mission while at the same time challenging the federal government to do its part.
Somebody says here, you know me, I don't duck no smoke. Talk about the fact that Republicans wouldn't sign a bill. Well, why would they sign a bill for something that no matter who's in office is supposed to be defended in the first place? Why should you sign a bill when you are literally supposed to be closing off our borders because that is a national security concern? Listen, we shouldn't have to have a bill in order to protect our borders. Why would we sign a bill? The bill was basically leveraging our borders in order to get more money for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and they sent $95 billion over there anyway, and they still ain't closed off our borders. Why would they try to prevent Texas from being able to protect their borders? Why should a Republican sign a bill for something that we supposed to be doing anyway? Maybe I should negotiate with my wife. I can get more box or I'll protect the household if I get more box. No, my house is supposed to be protected anyway. Whether or not I get some box, that's a completely different separate issue. We can't hold accountable, or we can't hold the country hostage so that we can send more money over for wars that we're not even supposed to be a part of in the first place. Are you serious? So they're going to hold the country hostage for whether or not we should be protecting our borders.
Mayor, do you support
Insane.
consolidating CTA, Metro, PACE, and RTA per the bill that's now in Springfield? And If not, do you support any kind of reform of governance of transit?
Well, what we do need is we actually have to have a transportation system that works for the entire state of Illinois. Obviously, the city of Chicago is the economic hub and engine for the state. And, I'm working hard to make sure that our transportation system in Chicago increases ridership, which that's happening, hiring more people, which we're doing, and then creating better streets for better streets for buses. That's infrastructure to make sure that buses can flow. That's also sidewalk repair, bus-only lanes. As far as this particular piece of legislation, quite frankly, I haven't had a chance to really dig into it. But the real goal is to make sure that public transportation works for everyone.
How do you plan?
So ultimately, he's over in the state asking for $1 billion more, complaining about how he's not getting the funding that he needed from the federal government. And they saying it is Trump's fault. Hey, listen, when in duress, or when you can't get your stuff together, or when you can't manage your city effectively, or when you can't manage your state, all you got to do is blame Trump. No matter what happens, just blame Trump. Don't worry about it. Listen, problems in the streets, crime, blame Trump. Funding, migrants, blame Trump. No matter what, just blame it on Trump. We got a whole president that refused to even talk about the migrant crisis, but we can blame Trump. They're going to talk about everything. Mamala being a holder of the country, abortion rights, Israel, protests, Colombia, distractions. Blame Trump. Unreal. Trump can't even campaign right now because he in court literally designed this way so that he can't reach the constituents that he's trying to drum up support for in order to be able to run an election effectively. Meanwhile, Biden ain't running the country. He over here in Chicago and Wisconsin acting like he did a whole bunch. But hey, listen, blame Trump.